The first sign was not the snow. It was the dog. Just before sunrise on a Tuesday in December of 1887, in a one-room cabin at the far end of Marchmont Ridge, Colorado, an old shepherd named Barnaby stopped eating. He stood beside the door, with his nose pointed at the floor. Not up, down. His ears did not move. His tail did not move. Only his ribs, rising and falling, showed he was still alive at all. Cordelia Ashworth watched him from the stove. She was 42 years old. She weighed 265 pounds, and she had learned, in the 3 winters, since the diphtheria, to notice the smallest things. Cup left in the wrong place. A shutter not fully latched. A dog who would not eat. Come here, boy. Barnaby did not come. Then the floor beneath him gave a soft, hollow knock. Not from above. From underneath. Cordelia set down her tin cup. Outside her window, half a mile east, the town that had buried her in silence was just beginning to wake. Chimneys smoking, bells warming, children being told one more time to stay away from the woman on the hill. None of them knew what was waking under their feet. None of them knew that the woman they had already buried was about to dig them all out. The cabin had 4 windows. Cordelia kept 3 of them shuttered. The 4th faced east, toward town. She left that one open on purpose, because if the people of Marchmont Ridge ever wondered whether she was still alive, they could look up the hill and see the pale square of her lamp burning at 4 in the morning. They rarely looked, but she kept it burning anyway. She had reasons for everything now. Small ones, careful ones, the kind of reasons a person builds when the large reasons have all been buried. She turned back to the stove and pressed her palm flat against the iron. Warm, not hot. She added a split of pine. Then another. The fire took hold with a quiet snap. Behind her, Barnaby had not moved. You're an old dog to be starting new tricks. He looked at her once, then back at the floor. Cordelia crossed the room. The floorboards complained under her weight the way they always did, the way she had stopped hearing years ago. She lowered herself beside the dog. Her knees cracked. Her breath came short. She placed her ear on the plank. Nothing. Then a soft knock. Then another. Not steady. Not mechanical. Not a mouse. Mice scratched. Mice ran. This was slow. She sat back on her heels. Barnaby's tail gave a single sweep, then went still again. I hear it. Because she did. Because for 3 years now, off and on, she had been hearing it. Her husband Elias used to blame it on frost heaving. He would come in from splitting wood with sawdust on his sleeves and say, "Ground moves at night, Cordy. Same as we do." And she would nod and set his plate down and believe him. Because he was a man who read newspapers. Because he had gone as far east as St. Louis once and come back with a book about rock formations. Because he was the kind of man who explained things. Then he stopped being able to explain things. Then he stopped being anything at all. Cordelia pushed the memory back down where she kept it. Not away, just down. Because away was not a place she had ever managed to send it. She rose slowly and went to the window. The sky over Marchmont Ridge was the color of a tin cup left out in the rain. Not gray, not white, something in between. A sky that meant weather was thinking. She looked toward the town. Half a mile of frozen meadow lay between her cabin and the first roof. She could see the church steeple, the schoolhouse, the long low shape of Bramwell's general store. Beyond those, the mine works, and beyond those, the pale wall of the Rockies, sharp as a broken tooth against the paling sky. Somewhere down there, Prudence Ashworth was already up, already dressed in black, already praying. Cordelia knew this the way a person knows what time the sun sets. Her mother-in-law had been up before sunrise for 41 years. It was a matter of principle. It was a matter, Prudence liked to say, of not letting the devil find you idle. The devil, Cordelia had come to understand, was a very busy figure in Prudence Ashworth's imagination. He hid in card games. He hid in fiddle music. He hid, apparently, in the bodies of daughters-in-law who could not keep their children alive. Cordelia turned away from the window. Barnaby was scratching now. Slow, patient. One paw against the wide plank near the hearth. Enough! He kept scratching. She lowered herself again. Her hip caught and she made a small sound she did not want to make. Then she pressed her palm flat against the wood beside him. The knock came again. Soft, deep. This time she felt it. Not just heard it. A vibration. As if something under the cabin had shifted its weight the way a sleeping person shifts in a bed. Cordelia lifted her hand. She looked at Barnaby. Barnaby looked back. Well, all right. She went to the shed. The shed was where Elias had kept his tools. She had left them exactly the way he had left them. The hand shovel on the second peg. The pickaxe on the third. The lantern on the shelf above, filled with kerosene she had bought 2 summers ago, from Silas Bramwell and never used. She lifted the shovel down. The handle was smooth, where his palm had worn it. She did not think about that. She thought about the floorboard instead. She thought about the sound. She carried the shovel back to the cabin, and she carried the lantern, and she stood in the doorway for a long moment looking at the room. Because once she started, she knew she would not stop, which was fine. She had time. She had nothing but time. Cordelia knelt beside the plank. The nails were old, square cut. Elias had driven them himself the year before Marion was born. She fitted the shovel blade under the edge and worked it back and forth until the board gave a sharp complaint. Then it lifted. Beneath it was packed dirt, dark, cold to the touch. She scraped a little away with the tip of the blade. More dirt. Then, 6 inches down, her shovel struck something that was not dirt. She heard it before she felt it. A small dry sigh, the way a house sighs when a door opens somewhere far off. She widened the hole. The dirt fell away in soft handfuls. Barnaby leaned over her shoulder, his breath warm on her ear. She pushed him back gently. Wait. He waited. The hole grew until she could see it clearly. A dark space beneath the cabin. Not a cellar. She had no cellar. Elias had meant to dig one the summer before he died, and then the diphtheria came, and after that, no one had dug anything at all except 3 small graves, and the roots of a chokecherry tree. Cordelia lit the lantern. She lowered it slowly into the opening. The flame stayed steady. She knew what that meant. Elias had told her once, on a walk along the ridge above the silver works, that a steady flame in a hole meant good air. A guttering flame meant bad. Miners lived and died by it. He had said it the way he said everything. Quietly, as if the world were a schoolroom, and he was in no hurry. She had rolled her eyes at him then, because who wanted to hear about mine air on a Sunday afternoon? She was not rolling her eyes now. The flame burned clean and yellow. She lowered it further. The light spread across a curved wall of packed clay and stone. Layered. Old. Not the work of an animal. Not the work of water either, or not entirely. Something in between. A natural break. She let out a breath she had not known she was holding. Then she lay flat on her stomach and pushed her head down through the opening. The air below was not the cabin air. It was colder, but not by much. And it smelled. Not badly. Just of things she had not smelled in a long time. Old stone. Damp earth. And something else. Something faintly mineral, like the taste of a nail held in the mouth. Cordelia pulled her head back up. She sat on the floor beside the hole for a long moment. Barnaby put his chin on her knee. She scratched behind his ear. All right. Because whatever this was, it was hers now. Because for the first time in 3 winters, she had found a room in her own house that no one in Marchmont Ridge had walked into first. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, Cordelia was on her hands and knees in the cabin, sweat running along her hairline, her sleeves pushed up to the elbows, dirt under every nail. She had widened the opening to almost 2 feet across. Enough for her if she went slowly. Enough for Barnaby without question. She sat back and wiped her forehead with the inside of her wrist. She was thinking about Elias again. She could not help it. She was thinking about the last morning. He had not been able to swallow water. Marion was already gone, 3 days in the ground. Wren was in the corner cot, and the sound coming out of him was a sound she still heard sometimes in the middle of the night, though she had never once described it aloud to another living person. Elias had reached for her hand. He had said, "Cordy, listen." She had leaned close. Her hair had fallen across his face, and he had said, "Under the—" That was it. Under the— He had died, with 2 words hanging in the air between them, and for 3 years she had turned those 2 words over in her mind the way a person turns a river stone in the palm, looking for meaning that was not there. Under the covers, under the bed, under the porch, under the willow. She had checked everyone. She had emptied trunks. She had lifted rugs. She had pulled up a floorboard once already, in the second winter, and found nothing but a mouse nest and the dry husk of a wasp. She had stopped looking. She had told herself he was delirious. She had told herself dying men said the beginnings of sentences all the time. She had told herself to let it go. She had never let it go. She looked down into the hole. Under the— She stood up. Her knees popped like green wood in a fire. She braced herself on the edge of the hearth until her balance came back. Then she went to the shelf beside the door and lifted down the tin cup Prudence had given her at the wedding. It was a plain thing, etched with a single word, in the mother-in-law's precise hand: obedience. Cordelia had never once drunk from it. She used it now to scoop the loose dirt from the hole, load by load, careful, slow. She had been going for perhaps an hour when she heard the singing. She froze. The singing was faint, high, coming from beyond the fence. 2 voices, girls maybe 8 or 9. She knew the tune before she made out the words because she had known the tune for 3 years now, and the tune had a way of finding her at the moments when she was least prepared for it. Fat widow, fat grave, killed the ones she couldn't save. Cordelia's hand tightened on the tin cup. The verse went on. She would not repeat the rest of it, not even to herself, but she knew it. She knew all of it, because the children of Marchmont Ridge had been singing it since the first spring after the funeral, when someone's mother or someone's aunt or someone at the well pump had put words to a melody, and the melody had spread the way small cruelties always spread, through a small town in the West. The 2 girls sang the whole verse. Then they laughed. Then they ran. Cordelia stayed on her knees. Barnaby was up. His hackles were half raised. He was looking toward the door with the still, precise attention of an animal that had done this before and knew it was not worth barking. Down. He lay down. She lifted another scoop of dirt. She poured it into the bucket beside the hearth. She lifted another. She did not cry. She had not cried in front of Barnaby in a very long time, because she had noticed in the second winter that when she cried, he stopped eating for the rest of the day. And she needed him to eat. She needed him more than she needed to weep. So she scooped dirt, and she scooped dirt, and when her hand slipped, and the tin cup rang against a stone, and the sound was almost pretty in the quiet cabin, she said, out loud to no one in particular, "All right, Elias. I'm listening now." By mid-morning she had to go to town. She did not want to. She never wanted to. But she had used the last of her lamp oil filling the miner's lantern, and she had a feeling, though she could not have said why, that she was going to need a great deal of lamp oil in the coming weeks. She put on her heavy coat. The one Elias had bought her the winter before Wren was born, the one Prudence had said in front of guests, was foolish for a woman of her size to attempt in, that shade of green. Cordelia had worn it every winter since. She left Barnaby inside. She latched the door. The walk to Marchmont Ridge took her 23 minutes on a good day. On a bad day, when her knees were swollen, it could take almost an hour. Today her knees felt fine, which she noticed, which she did not trust. The road curved down along the meadow and then bent east along the frozen creek. She kept her eyes on the ground, because if she kept her eyes on the ground, she did not have to see the faces in the windows. She heard them anyway. A shutter closing, a door being pulled shut, a woman's voice, low and clear, "Go inside, Sarah, now." Cordelia walked on. The general store sat at the corner, where the wagon road met the church road. A single bell hung above the door. Silas Bramwell had been the storekeeper of Marchmont Ridge for 19 years. He was a thin man, 50-something, widower. He was not kind to her exactly. He was something rarer than kind. He was ordinary. He treated her the way he treated everyone, which in Marchmont Ridge for Cordelia Ashworth was a form of grace, so quiet it might as well have been invisible. The bell rang when she opened the door. 2 women were inside. Cordelia recognized them, without looking directly at their faces. One was Mrs. Halverston, the assayer's wife. The other was younger, new. Both women stopped talking. Cordelia went to the counter. "Silas, Mrs. Ashworth." He said it evenly, not warmly, not coldly. He said it the way a man reads a name from a ledger. "Kerosene, for gallons." Silas raised an eyebrow. "Just one." He set his pencil down. "For? Yes. That's a lot of light, Mrs. Ashworth." "It is." He looked at her for a moment, not unkindly. Then he nodded and went to the back room. Behind Cordelia, the younger woman whispered something. Mrs. Halverston shushed her. Not because the whisper was wrong, because it was audible. Cordelia kept her eyes on the counter. She thought about the hole under her floorboard. She thought about the steady yellow flame. She thought about the way the air had smelled underground. Old stone, damp earth, and that faint mineral tang, like a nail held on the tongue. Silas came back with 2 cans of kerosene in each hand. He set them on the counter, went back, came out with 2 more. "That'll be $1.80. She counted the coins out onto the wood. He counted them into his hand. He did not ask her what she wanted the kerosene for. She loved him a little in that moment, not the way a wife loves, just the way a person loves the small, unshining thing that lets her keep walking. Anything else? She hesitated. Then, salt, 10 pounds. Flour, 50. Beans, 25. Dried. He wrote it all down. The younger woman had stopped whispering. She was staring now. Cordelia could feel it on the back of her neck the way a person feels a lit match held too close. Silas finished writing. He looked up. "You expecting company, Mrs. Ashworth?" He said it lightly. Not a jab, just the small friendly nothing that a shopkeeper says. Cordelia met his eyes, just for a second. "Winter." He held her look. Then he nodded once, and he did not ask again. She walked out with the smaller items in a sack over her shoulder. Silas would send the boy with the flour and beans and kerosene on the sled that afternoon. At the edge of the road, she stopped, because there, at the corner, where the church path met the wagon road, stood Prudence Ashworth, 65 years old, straight as a fence post, dressed in black wool from throat to hem. Her hair was pinned tight beneath a black bonnet. Her hands were folded in front of her. She was not carrying anything. She was standing, waiting. Cordelia felt her stomach drop the way it always dropped, when Prudence Ashworth stood between her and where she was going. "Mother Ashworth." "Cordelia." Prudence's voice was even, not warm, not cold. Exactly the voice she used to lead a hymn. "I saw you go into Bramwell's. I needed supplies. For cans of kerosene." Cordelia said nothing. "For what?" "For lamps, Mother Ashworth." "You do not have 4 lamps." "I do now." Prudence's mouth tightened, not into a frown, into something more precise than a frown, something that had been folded and refolded so many times over so many years that it barely moved anymore at all. "There is talk. There is always talk. About your cabin. About digging." Cordelia's breath caught. Just once. Just for the smallest possible fraction of a second. But Prudence Ashworth was a woman who had spent 41 years reading the faces of others for the small signs of sin. She saw the catch. Cordelia knew she saw the catch. "I am digging a root cellar. In December. When I have the time. You have had time for 3 years. Cordelia lifted the sack higher on her shoulder. "I have it now." Prudence looked past her. toward the cabin on the ridge, then back. Elias would not have approved. Cordelia's hand tightened on the strap. Elias is not here to approve or disapprove of anything, Mother Ashworth. The words came out quieter than she meant. But they came out. Prudence's eyes flickered. Not with pain. Prudence Ashworth did not permit herself pain in public. With something colder. Something that had been sharpened over 3 winters into a very thin edge. Do not speak his name like that. Then do not use it against me. They stood in the road. A wagon passed. The driver did not look at them. The horse's breath rose in twin plumes and drifted away toward the church. Prudence gathered her skirt in one gloved hand. I will come to see you. Soon. You are always welcome. It was a lie. It was the oldest lie between them. Both women knew it. Neither corrected it. Prudence turned and walked away toward the church. Cordelia stood in the road for another moment. Her heart was beating in her ears. Her knees were beginning to remember that they had walked half a mile downhill. She adjusted the sack. She took a breath. Then she started home. Barnaby was at the door when she opened it. He was not scratching. He was sitting, upright, waiting, as if he had counted the minutes. I know. She dropped the sack inside the door. She unbuttoned the green coat, with fingers that would not quite obey her. She sat down heavily on the bench by the stove and closed her eyes. For a moment, she was very tired. Then Barnaby whined. Just once. Soft. Low. He was looking at the hole. Cordelia opened her eyes. All right, old man. She stood up. Her knees complained. She ignored them. She lit a second lantern from the stove and set it beside the hole. Then she lit the miner's lantern and set it on the floor. She picked up the shovel. You stay. Barnaby did not stay. She had known he would not. She let him come. She widened the opening until she could lower herself through it comfortably. Because comfortably was the operative word for a woman of her size, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. She took her time. She used the edge of the hearthstone to brace against. She lowered her feet first, then her hips, then her shoulders until she was standing on packed clay 4 feet below her own kitchen. The lantern was in her hand. Barnaby jumped down after her. He landed lightly. He shook himself. Then he trotted 3 steps into the dark and stopped and waited for her. Cordelia lifted the lantern. The passage was wider than she had guessed. Not a room, not a cellar, something in between. The walls were layered clay, cross-hatched with veins of paler stone, that caught the lantern light and held it. The ceiling was low but not crushing. She could stand upright if she kept her head slightly bowed. And it went. That was the thing. It went. Not in a straight line. Curved. To the east. Toward town. Cordelia stood in her own foundation and looked into the dark and felt something move in her chest that she had not felt in 3 winters. It was not hope. She was too old and too tired for hope. It was closer to attention. She took a step. The lantern light slid forward with her. Then another. Barnaby padded ahead. His paws made no sound. His tail was up but not wagging. He was working. The air was cold, but not the cold of the world above. It was old cold. Steady cold. The cold of a place that had been the same temperature for longer than anyone alive. Cordelia walked 10 paces. 20. 30. The passage narrowed slightly. Then widened again. She lifted the lantern higher. On the left wall, there was a fold of pale stone that looked almost worked, almost cut. She ran her fingers along it. Cold. Smooth. Old. She kept walking. At about 40 paces from the cabin, Barnaby stopped. He was standing beside the wall. He was looking down. Cordelia lowered the lantern. At the base of the wall, half covered by loose clay, was a corner of something square. Metal. She knelt. Her knees did not complain this time. She did not notice her knees at all. She brushed the clay away. A tin book. Small. Not much bigger than a Bible. The kind of tin a man might use for tobacco or for nails or for the small important papers of a small important life. It was rusted at the seams. The lid was pressed down tight. Cordelia lifted it. It was heavier than she expected. She sat back on her heels. She held the box in both hands. Because she knew, before she opened it, whose hands had last held it. She knew the way a person knows a voice on the other side of a door. She set the lantern down. She set the box on her knees. She wiped her palms on her skirt. Then, slowly, with fingers that were not quite steady, she worked her thumb under the lid. It resisted. Then it gave. Inside was a folded oilcloth. Beneath the oilcloth was a book. Small. Leather. Cheap. The kind of ledger a man might have bought for a nickel, from Silas Bramwell, and carried in his coat pocket for years, filling with the small notes that made up the daily arithmetic of his life. Cordelia lifted it out. She opened the first page. The handwriting was Elias's. She had known it would be, but knowing was not the same as seeing. Seeing his hand again, after 3 years of never seeing it again, made a sound come out of her that she did not recognize as her own voice. It was not a sob. It was smaller than a sob. It was the sound a house makes when the frost lets go of a beam. She held the book against her chest for a long moment. Then she opened it again. To the beginning. The first entry was dated April of 1883, 9 months before he died. Struck hollow ground behind the woodshed. Clay layer, then air. Lantern held steady. Not a den. Something older. She turned the page. Widened by 2 feet today. Cordy asked what I was doing out so late. Told her the fence. Another. Passage runs east. Cannot be a coincidence. The whole ridge sits on something. Silas showed me the paper from Denver about the fevers moving up through Kansas. Said the trains might carry it. Said quarantine will be the only cure until better medicine comes. Cordelia's hand shook. The fevers. Elias had known about the fevers 9 months before they came. He had read about them in the paper Silas Bramwell kept behind the counter. He had understood, in whatever quiet corner of his quiet mind, that a small town at the end of a wagon road, with 1 doctor and no railway, might not survive what was coming. He had understood, and he had said nothing to her, and he had gone out at night and dug. She turned another page. Marion asked if I would take her fishing on Sunday. I said yes. Then I came down here anyway. Another. Wren has a cough. Cordy says it's the wood smoke. Please, God, let it be the wood smoke. The pages after that were shorter. Some were only a single line. Marion won't wake. Wren is fading. Cordy has not slept. I can feel it in my throat. Cordelia stopped. She could not read the next page. She turned it anyway. Her fingers moved without her permission. The last entry. The handwriting was worse. Slanting. Weak. But it was still his. If the worst comes, Cordy will need somewhere. She is stronger than anyone knows. She is stronger than she knows. Tell her under the 2 words. Then nothing. Cordelia closed the book. She sat on the clay floor of the passage her husband had dug in secret 4 years ago, and she pressed the ledger to her chest, and she wept. Not the way she had wept in the second winter at midnight, alone. This was quieter than that. This was the crying of a woman who had, at last, been told what her husband had been trying to say. Barnaby leaned his head against her arm. He did not whine. He did not lick her face. He simply stood beside her, warm and old and patient. When she was done, she wiped her face with the back of her hand. She opened the box again. Beneath, where the book had been, folded small and tight, was a piece of paper. A map, roughly drawn, in pencil. Elias's hand. The cabin was a small square at one edge. From the square, a dotted line ran east. Not straight, curving. Following, she understood now, the natural break in the stone. The dotted line ended in a question mark. And beyond the question mark, in Elias's cramped, careful print, were 4 words. Toward the church, I think. Cordelia looked up. She looked into the dark of the passage. Barnaby was watching her. All right. She stood. She lifted the lantern. She took another step east. Then another. The passage widened. Then narrowed. Then widened again. Barnaby padded ahead of her, sure-footed as a young dog. She followed. She lost count of her paces at some point. 50, 60, 70. At perhaps 80 paces, the passage bent sharply north. She stopped. She held the lantern up. The flame gave a small, definite lean toward the far end of the passage. Moving air. She knelt and pressed her ear to the wall. First nothing. Then very faint, muffled, as if heard through a wool blanket. A bell. A single, thin note. Then, after a long pause, another. The church bell. Cordelia sat back on her heels. The lantern light shivered against the wall. She was under the town. She had walked, without meaning to, from her own kitchen to somewhere beneath the edge of Marchmont Ridge. Above her, in a world she could not see, the bell of Prudence Ashworth's church was ringing for the noon prayer. She got to her feet slowly. She was standing in the middle of a road her husband had begun, and had not lived to finish. She was standing under the feet of the people, who sang about her grave. Barnaby had stopped. He was looking up. She followed his gaze. Above them, the ceiling of the passage was slightly domed, higher than the rest. The clay was darker, and running through it, faint but unmistakable, was a root. A single root, thick as her wrist. Old, dry. Reaching down through the earth toward the lantern light, as if it had been waiting for someone to bring a lantern. Cordelia knew that root. She knew it the way she knew Elias's handwriting. She had planted the tree it belonged to. She had planted it 4 years ago, in the spring after the diphtheria, in the small fenced plot on the eastern edge of Marchmont Ridge, in the ground above the 3 graves she had dug, with her own hands and Silas Bramwell's shovel and no one else's help. A chokecherry. She was standing under her children. She was standing under her husband. She was standing under everything she had lost, and everything she had buried, and everything she had told herself she had learned to live above. The lantern shook in her hand. Barnaby leaned against her leg. She did not cry this time. She did not have anything left. She simply stood there, in the passage her dead husband had dug, under the graves of the family she had lost, and she said, aloud in a voice that did not belong to a grieving woman anymore, but to a woman who had, finally, been given a job to do, "I hear you." Above her, the church bell rang the 12th time. Then it stopped, and Cordelia Ashworth turned around and walked all 80 paces back toward her cabin, with the ledger pressed against her chest, and the old dog trotting at her heels. She climbed the ladder. She set the ledger on the kitchen table. She sat down. She did not light the stove. She did not eat. She looked at the tin box. She looked at the open floorboard. She looked at the dog. And when the sky outside her one unshuttered window began, at last, to darken toward evening, Cordelia Ashworth said, quietly to the empty cabin, "All right, Elias. I know what you were trying to say." She stood up. She picked up the shovel. She went back down into the dark. Because whatever was waking under Marchmont Ridge was hers now. And winter was coming. The next morning, Cordelia Ashworth did 3 things before she lit the stove. She wiped the mud from her boots. She put the tin box on the high shelf above the flour barrel, where Prudence Ashworth had never once looked. And she opened Elias's ledger to a blank page at the back. She wrote the date, December 7th, 1887. Below it, she wrote a single line. Widen the passage. Brace the weak places. Keep going east. Then she closed the book. Then she went to work. She dug for 6 days. She dug in the dark, before dawn and in the last light before supper. She hauled the loose earth out in Elias's old tin cup, load by load, into the bucket by the hearth. When the bucket was full, she carried it past the woodshed and spread it thin behind the barn, where the drifts would cover it. She never dumped in the same place twice. She braced the weak places with pine. She had bought the pine from Jackson Reed at the sawmill. Reed had asked her what she was building. She had said, "Shelves." He had raised one eyebrow. He had not asked again. But she had felt his eyes on the back of her coat all the way out of the mill yard, and she had known, before her boots hit the road, that by supper the whole of Marchmont Ridge would know she had bought lumber she did not need. She had been right. By the 8th day the boys had a new name for her. She heard it for the first time on the 9th morning. She was walking home from Bramwell's with 2 cans of kerosene in each hand, when a group of boys came around the corner. 5 of them, 9, 10 years old, boots too big, coats too small. They saw her. They stopped. Then the tallest cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, clear as a bell in the cold air, "Fat widow, fat grave, digging deep to save." The others laughed. Then, together all 5, "Fat widow, fat grave, digging deep to save." Cordelia did not stop walking. She did not turn her head. She did not adjust the cans in her hands. She was almost past them, when the tallest boy dropped to his hands and knees in the middle of the road and began to dig, with both hands, in the frozen ruts, grinning up at her. Cordelia stopped. She looked down at him. She looked at him for a long time. The boy's grin faltered. Just enough that she saw it. Just enough that he knew she saw it. Then Cordelia Ashworth did something Marchmont Ridge had not seen her do in 3 years. She smiled. Small, slow, not warm. "You keep digging, son. You get about 6 feet down and you tell me what you find." The boy's grin was gone. His friends had stopped laughing. She adjusted the cans in her hands. Then she walked away. She was 3 blocks up the road before she started shaking. She sat down on a fence rail. She set the cans down. She put both hands over her mouth, and she breathed through her fingers until the shaking stopped. Because she had never spoken back to any of them. Because the boy had been afraid of her for 1 second, and she had liked it, and she did not know yet whether liking it made her a bad woman or a woman who had finally remembered she had teeth. She picked up the cans. She walked home. She dug all afternoon. The passage reached 60 feet on the 11th day. That was when she hit the water. She was working alone. Her shovel struck something soft. She struck again. The clay gave way, and then very suddenly her boot was cold. She looked down. Water was pooling around her toe. Clear, slow, steady, rising the way a spring rises. From below, Cordelia stared. She knelt. She dipped 1 finger in. She brought it to her lips. Sweet, not mineral, not sulphurous, not the flat, stony taste of the town well. Sweet, the kind of sweet that meant deep water. Old water. She sat back on her heels. Because she knew, and everyone in Marchmont Ridge knew, that the town well had been failing since October. The whole town was melting snow now. In pots. On stoves. Kettle after kettle. Every family. Every day. And here, 60 feet underground, was enough sweet water for all of them. Cordelia knelt beside the small pool. Barnaby was beside her. Don't. He did not drink. She thought about Silas Bramwell hauling snow in from behind his store. She thought about Mrs. Halverston's baby, who was 8 months old, and had been sick since November. She thought about the boy in the road, grinning up at her. Then she thought about the wedding cup with the word obedience etched on the side, and the funeral she had held alone, and the way Prudence Ashworth had said, "There is talk." She stood up. She placed a flat stone over the pool. She packed clay around the edges. She sealed it. She left it. And she walked back toward the cabin, without looking behind her. She did not tell anyone. Not that day. Not the next. She was not proud of it. But she was not sorry either. Because a woman, who has been left to die in silence for 3 years, learns to keep her own secrets. She kept digging. The passage reached 70 feet. Then 80. She began to notice on the 12th day that the eastern end was warmer than the rest. 2 degrees, maybe 3, but steady. She held her palm against the wall, against the ceiling, against the floor, warmest on the ceiling, which meant something above her was giving off heat, which meant she was under a building. She sat down against the wall. She took out the map Elias had left her. She unfolded it on her lap. She thought about her paces. She thought about the bend in the passage. She thought about the church bell. She was not under the church. She was under the schoolhouse. Above her, right now, 22 children were sitting in rows on wooden benches, learning their sums. Above her, Eleanor Price was pacing the aisle, with her ruler in her hand. Above her, the daughter of Mrs. Halverston was probably drawing a horse in the margin of her slate. Cordelia folded the map. She put it back in her pocket. She stood. She did not dig into the schoolhouse floor. Of course she did not. She simply looked up once and said softly, so that not even Barnaby could hear, "All right, I know where you are." Then she turned north, because the map said the church was north, and because if she was going to keep digging, she needed to know how far the whole of the town's foundations went. On the 15th day, she was in the north arm, packing dirt against a soft spot in the ceiling, when she heard the knock on her cabin door above. 3 sharp taps. A pause. 3 more. She froze. Barnaby was up before she was. His hackles were raised. His head was tilted toward the ladder. Cordelia set the shovel down. She wiped her hands on her skirt. She climbed the ladder. She closed the trapdoor behind her. She kicked the rag rug over the seam. Then she went to the window. Outside, in the yard, stood 4 people. Silas Bramwell, which surprised her. Jackson Reed, from the sawmill. Old Elder Whitcomb, who was 72, and had been an elder of Prudence's congregation for 36 years. And behind them, straight as a fence post, her hands folded in front of her, stood Prudence Ashworth. Cordelia's hand went to her hair, then to her collar, then back to her side. "No, do not fix yourself for her. Not today." She opened the door. "Mother Ashworth." "Cordelia." Prudence did not step onto the porch. She stayed in the yard. The 3 men stood a pace behind her, in a loose line, like a fence she was carrying with her. "May we come in?" "No." Prudence's mouth tightened. "Then we will speak here." "Speak." Silas was looking at his boots. Jackson was looking at the sky. Elder Whitcomb was looking at Cordelia, with the mild, distant pity of a man who had come to say what he had been told to say. Prudence took a folded paper from her coat. "Do you know what this is?" "I do not." "It is the deed to this land." Cordelia said nothing. "It is in the name of Elias Ashworth." "Yes." "Not in yours." Cordelia felt the floor of the porch under her feet. She felt Barnaby behind her, not growling, not barking. She felt her own heartbeat, slow and heavy. "He died. He did. His property came to me. His property came to his family. I am his family. His mother is his family. And his mother is standing in the yard she has owned, on paper, for 29 years. Cordelia did not move. Prudence unfolded the paper. She held it up. She did not read it. She did not need to. "You have until the 2nd Sunday after Christmas." "To do what?" "To remove yourself from this cabin." "And go where?" Prudence's eyes did not change. "That is not the congregation's concern." The silence on the porch was total. Silas Bramwell shifted his weight. He did not look up. Jackson Reed cleared his throat. Elder Whitcomb said softly, "Cordelia, it is for the peace of the community." She looked at him. "Elder Whitcomb." "Yes." "What has the community done for me? In 3 winters?" "What?" He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at Prudence. Prudence's face did not move. "The dog will not be permitted at the boarding house." Cordelia's hand went to the doorframe, not for balance, for grip. She felt the wood under her palm. She felt the small nick where Elias years ago had missed a nail. She felt everything all at once very sharply. The cold, the 4 faces, the paper, the weight of a passage 60 feet below her, that these people did not know existed. The weight of a sweet spring she had sealed under a stone. She did not raise her voice. "Get off my porch. Cordelia. Get off my porch, Mother Ashworth. This is not your porch. It is today." Prudence folded the paper. Slowly, she put it back in her coat. She turned. She walked to the yard gate. The three men followed her. Silas Bramwell was the last to go. At the gate he paused. He looked back at Cordelia, just for a second. His mouth moved, as if he might say something. He did not say it. He touched the brim of his hat. Once. Quick. Then he turned and followed the others down the road. Cordelia stood on the porch until she could no longer see them. Then she went inside. She closed the door. She slid the bolt. She sat down on the bench by the stove. Her hands were shaking. Barnaby put his head on her knee. She did not cry. She had used up her crying, she thought, on the ledger. She stood up. She walked to the shelf. She took down the tin box. She opened it. She lifted out the ledger. She opened it to the last blank page. She wrote, below the entry from December 7th. They came with the deed today. 38 days, which means I dig faster. She closed the book. She put it back on the shelf. She lifted the rug. She opened the trapdoor. She climbed down. Barnaby came after her. She dug until the lantern burned low. She dug until her hands split. She dug until she could not remember what her own kitchen looked like. Then she climbed up, and she wrapped her palms in strips of clean cloth, and she slept badly in the chair by the stove with Barnaby's head on her feet. The pressure in the sky began to change on the 17th day. She noticed it first in her knees. She noticed it second in Barnaby, who had begun, at odd hours, to walk to the door and stand with his nose to the crack. She noticed it third in Silas Bramwell. She had gone to the store for a spool of wire. She did not expect him to speak to her, but when she set the coin on the counter, Silas laid his palm flat over it without picking it up and said quietly, without looking at her, "The glass is falling." She looked at him. "How fast?" "Faster than I've seen it fall in 10 years. She did not move. "Silas." "Yes. Are you telling me because I am the fat widow? Or are you telling me because you know?" He looked up. His eyes were tired. "I am telling you because I know." Cordelia nodded once. She took her wire. She left the store. She walked home faster than she had walked anywhere in 3 winters. That night she did not sleep at all. She spent the whole of it underground. She widened the north branch. She dug 2 new side chambers off the main line, low but wide. She dragged 3 sacks of dried beans down from the pantry, 2 smoked hams, the last of Silas's flour, a small keg of salt, a bundle of tallow candles wrapped in oilcloth, a folded quilt Elias's mother had made for their wedding, which Cordelia had kept in the bottom of a trunk she had not opened in 3 winters. She brought the quilt down. She spread it over one of the pine planks in the side chamber. Because if anyone was going to hide under her floor before winter was over, they were going to be warm. She did not think then about who anyone might be. She would not let herself. By dawn, the north passage was 90 feet long. She climbed up the ladder. She stood in her kitchen. She rolled her shoulders. Her back was a single long ache. Outside, the sky over Marchmont Ridge was clear, cold, sharp. The stars had not yet faded. She looked at the western ridge. Above the ridge, along the line, where the pines met the sky, there was a color she did not recognize. Not white, not gray, not even the tin cup color of the week before. Pale, flat green. She stared at it for a long time. She had never seen that color in the sky before. Barnaby was on the porch beside her. His ears were forward. His tail was low. He was not looking at the sky. He was looking at the western horizon at the level of the trees. Cordelia turned back to the cabin. She walked to the window that faced east. She thought about 22 children. She thought about the sweet water she had sealed under a stone. She thought about a woman with 38 days and a green sky. Then she went to the shed and got Elias's snowshoes, which she had never used, and she strapped them onto her boots and she walked out into the meadow toward the town. She did not go all the way. She stopped at Silas's back porch. She knocked. Once. She was not going to knock twice. Silas opened the door. He was in his shirt sleeves. He had a spoon in his hand. "Mrs. Ashworth." Silas. It's not even sunrise. The glass. His face changed. How far has it fallen? He looked past her, over her shoulder at the western ridge. She saw him see the color. He did not say anything for a moment. Then, come in.
No.
Then tell me. Send the children home. Mrs. Ashworth. Silas. Send the children home. Today. Every one of them. Before noon. I don't have the authority. Then tell someone who does. Tell the parson. Tell Whitcomb. Tell my mother-in-law if you have to, but send them home. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. I will try. Try hard. I will. She turned to go. Mrs. Ashworth. She stopped. The lumber. From Reed. Yes. You are not building shelves.
No.
What are you building? She looked at him. For the first time in 3 winters, she looked a person full in the face. A door. For anyone who needs one. Silas Bramwell stood in his own doorway, with a spoon in his hand. Then, all right, he closed the door. She turned. She walked back to the cabin. She did not look at the western sky. She did not need to. By noon, the school had not been let out. She watched from her window. She saw no line of small figures on the road. She saw no wagons at the parsonage. She saw one thin plume of smoke from the schoolhouse chimney, and one from the parsonage, and one from each of the 38 households. And the smoke was going straight up. Straight up. All of it. Straight up meant no wind. Straight up in a green sky meant the wind was coming. She turned from the window. She sat down at the table. She put her head in her hands. Because she had done what she could do. Because a woman, who had been called a fat widow, could only push so hard before the town pushed back. Because Silas had said, I will try. And she had watched him mean it. And because trying in Marchmont Ridge was not always enough. She stood up. She went to the shelf. She took down the ledger. She wrote, December 17th. Noon. Glass falling. Sky green. No wind. No children sent home. She closed the book. She spent the rest of that day underground. She widened the eastern branch by another 6 feet. She placed lanterns at the entrance to each side chamber. She filled a barrel with water from the sweet spring and rolled it into the largest chamber and covered it with a scrap of muslin. She laid out folded blankets. She stacked pine kindling in a corner. She placed a jar of matches on a wooden shelf. She placed a second jar next to it. She placed a third. At 3 in the afternoon, she went up to bring Barnaby down. He would not come. He was standing at the door. His nose was against the crack. His ears were flat. Barnaby. He did not turn. Old man. Come. He whined. Low. From deep in his chest. Cordelia opened the door. The wind, which had not been there an hour before, hit her in the face. Just a first push. Just a warning. Just the beginning. She stepped outside. The sky over the western ridge was no longer green. It was black. Black at the bottom along the pines. White above it. A moving line, drawn across the world by a hand she could not see, sliding steadily east. Cordelia stood on her porch. She lifted her thermometer from its nail on the doorpost. The mercury had dropped 11 degrees since noon. She looked at the sky. She looked at the town. She saw one small figure, in a black coat, walking away from the schoolhouse. The teacher, Eleanor Price, alone. No children behind her. Cordelia's hand tightened on the doorpost. Eleanor was not walking home. Eleanor was walking back toward the schoolhouse. She had gone somewhere, and now she was returning. She was carrying an armload of blankets. Cordelia understood, in one long breath, what that meant. The children were still in the school. Someone had not been able to send them home. Silas had tried. He had failed. The parson had refused, or the elders had refused, or Prudence Ashworth had said the words "do not frighten the community" over a fat widow's warning, and someone had listened to her because someone always listened to her. And now the storm was 3 miles away, and coming fast, and Eleanor Price was carrying blankets back to a schoolhouse full of children, who were about to be trapped. Cordelia turned. She went inside. She closed the door. She dropped the bolt. She lifted the trapdoor. Barnaby was already at her heels. She climbed down. She lifted the lantern. She looked into the dark of the eastern passage. 80-some feet away, above her, was the floor of the schoolhouse. Between here and there was clay, and shale and the roots of a chokecherry tree, and the whole of a dead man's belief that his wife was stronger than she knew. Above her, the wind hit the cabin for the first time. Hard. Once. Then again. The whole structure of her home shifted a fraction of an inch and settled. She heard, faintly, from a great distance, the schoolhouse bell begin to ring. Not for prayers. Not for noon. In short, frantic bursts. Cordelia lifted the shovel. She looked at Barnaby. "All right, old man. We go now." She turned east. She began to dig. Above her, the storm hit Marchmont Ridge, with a sound like a train coming out of a tunnel, and the windows of the schoolhouse went white in a single second. Below her, a fat widow with bleeding hands, and an old dog at her heels drove a shovel into a wall of clay and did not stop. She dug. She dug through the first hour of the storm, through the second, through the third, when the wind above her was so loud that the pine braces overhead trembled and shed small pieces of dust into her hair. She dug on her knees when the passage was low. She dug on her side when her knees would not hold. She dug flat on her back, one arm above her head, when the last shelf of shale between her and whatever was on the other side would not give. Then it gave. The shovel broke through. Cold air rushed at her face. Not the cold of the passage. Colder, sharper, and faintly through the small opening a sound. A child. Coughing. Cordelia lay in the dark on her back, with the shovel across her chest and listened. The coughing came again. Small. Bit. Then, closer, a woman's voice, low, calm, doing the impossible work of keeping 5 children from panicking underneath a schoolhouse that had become their tomb. "It's all right. It's all right. Listen to me. It's all right." Cordelia turned her head. Barnaby was beside her. His eyes were on the opening. His ears were forward. She reached out. She widened the hole with her hand. Loose clay came away in fistfuls. Then she called, through it, quietly, in a voice she did not raise, because raising her voice would have frightened the children on the other side. "Miss Price." Silence. Then, disbelieving. "Who is that?" Cordelia widened the hole another inch. She put her mouth close to it. "It's Cordelia Ashworth. I am under your floor, and I am coming through." The clay came away in wet, heavy fistfuls. Cordelia widened the hole with her fingers. With the shovel. With her fingers again, because the shovel was too clumsy for the last few inches. On the other side, the coughing had stopped. The silence was worse than the coughing. "Miss Price. I am here." "How many?" "5 children." "Myself." "Any hurt?" A pause. "The Halverston boy. His lips." Cordelia did not ask what color. She did not need to. She dug faster. The hole widened. 6 inches. 10. 12. Loose clay fell into the schoolhouse cellar in soft small avalanches. She could see, now, the pale wash of a lantern on the other side, and the shape of a woman kneeling by a wall, and behind the woman, huddled together against a stone foundation, the small dark shapes of 5 children. Cordelia pushed her arm through. Eleanor Price's hand met hers. Eleanor's hand was cold, bone cold, the cold of a woman who had wrapped every blanket she had around 5 children, and had none left for herself. Cordelia. Yes. How? Later. How? Miss Price. Later. Eleanor Price, who had been the schoolteacher of Marchmont Ridge for 6 years, and who had never in 6 years called Cordelia Ashworth anything but Mrs. Ashworth, said, quietly, "All right." The hole was almost wide enough. Cordelia pulled back. She braced her shoulder against the wall. She struck once with the shovel. A section of clay the size of a bread loaf came free. She looked at Barnaby. Go! The dog went. He squeezed through the opening low to the ground. He landed in the schoolhouse cellar. He shook himself. Clay dust flew from his coat. Then he did the thing Cordelia had known he would do. He walked, slow and calm, and steady, straight to the smallest child, and he lay down beside her. The child, who was 6 years old, and whose name Cordelia knew was Josephine Meade, put her hand on Barnaby's shoulder without looking up. Something in the cellar changed. Cordelia could feel it through the hole. The way the temperature of a room changes when a fever breaks. She pushed her head through. She saw them all. Josephine Meade, 6, in a wool cape too big for her. Nathaniel Halverston, 8, whose lips were the color she had been afraid they would be. 2 of the Whitcomb boys, 9 and 10, sitting shoulder to shoulder, their eyes very round. The Miller girl, 7, holding a slate in both hands, as if it were a book she was afraid of losing. Eleanor Price, 25, on her knees. Her hair had come down. Her hands were bleeding. Miss Price, listen. I am listening. There is a passage on the other side of this wall. It goes to my cabin. It is dark. It is low in places. It is warm. Warm. Warmer than here. Eleanor closed her eyes for 1 second, then opened them. What do we do? You bring the smallest first. On your hands and knees. Follow Barnaby. He knows the way. I will bring the rest. Yes. Miss Price. Yes. Can any of them walk? 3. Bring the 3. Come back for the others. Yes. Cordelia pulled her head back. She widened the hole another 2 inches. She stepped aside from the opening. Then she said, through the wall, in the voice she had once used to sing to her own children, Josephine, come here to me, little one. Barnaby will walk with you. The child stood. She walked, slow and unsteady, holding Barnaby's collar. She reached the hole. She looked at it. She looked at Cordelia. She did not hesitate. She climbed through. Cordelia caught her under the arms and set her down gently on the passage floor. The child looked up at her with the whole of her small face. Are you the fat widow? Cordelia did not flinch. She knelt. I am Mrs. Ashworth, and you are safe now. The child put her arms around Cordelia's neck. Cordelia held her for exactly 2 seconds. Then she stood up. She had 4 more to move. And a woman. In no time. She moved them. The Whitcomb boys came next, hand in hand. Then the Miller girl. Then Nathaniel Halverston, whom Eleanor half carried, through the opening, and whom Cordelia laid on the passage floor, and covered with Elias's wedding quilt, without a word. Eleanor came last. She stopped at the hole. She looked back at the cellar, at the broken door, at the pale square of storm light coming through the crack above. They would have died here. They did not. How did you know? I did not know. Then how? Cordelia looked at the dog, who was sitting quietly beside Josephine Meade, with the child's hand still on his shoulder. He knew. Eleanor Price looked at Barnaby. She did not say anything. She climbed through. Cordelia sealed the hole behind them with a flat plank and packed clay. Not to hide it, to keep the wind out. Then she lifted the smallest child onto her hip, and she walked back down the passage her husband had begun, toward the cabin with a schoolteacher and 5 surviving children, and an old dog following her through the dark. She did not think about her knees. She did not think about her weight. She did not think about anything at all except the small pulse of Josephine Meade's heartbeat against her shoulder. She got them to the cabin. She got them up the ladder. She sat them by the stove. She put more wood on. She heated broth. She wrapped the Halverston boy in 3 blankets and set him next to Barnaby, because Barnaby was warmer than any blanket she owned. She counted them again. 5. Then she looked at Eleanor Price, who was standing in the middle of the cabin holding her bloody hands in front of her. Miss Price. Yes. How many children were at school today? 22. Cordelia sat down. For 1 second, she could not breathe. 22 had gone in. 5 had come out through her wall. Where are the others? Some fathers came at noon. Took theirs. 7 or 8. Maybe. Which leaves? 9. 9. I could not send them. The road went white in a minute. I sent them to the cellar. I told them their fathers would come. Cordelia stood up. She said, very quietly, "No one is coming, Miss Price. Not up there. Not in this." "I know. So. Both women looked at the trapdoor. How many households? 9 children means at least 9 households. Some brothers. Some sisters. Maybe 6 houses. Maybe 7. You know which. I know all of them. Then draw it." Cordelia brought down the ledger. She opened it to a blank page. She set it in front of Eleanor Price with a stub of pencil. "Draw me the town, Miss Price. Every house. Every family. Put a mark on the ones with children left." Eleanor sat. She drew. Her hand was shaking, but her lines were steady. The map grew. Silas Bramwell's at the corner. Jackson Reed's past the mill. Old Elder Whitcomb's on the church road. The Halverstons behind the assay office. The Meads. The Millers. The parsonage. And at the top of the road, on the highest ground in Marchmont Ridge, the big frame house that had stood for 30 years, older than any other building in town, older than the church itself. Prudence Ashworth's. Eleanor drew a small square. She did not mark it. She looked up at Cordelia. She would not have kept a child today. She lives alone. "I know. But her house is on our way." "I know." Cordelia looked at the map. Then at the trapdoor. Then at Barnaby, who was already at the ladder. "Miss Price, you stay. You keep the children warm. You feed the boy broth every 20 minutes, until his lips come back. You do not let anyone climb out of that trapdoor except me." "Yes. If I do not come back by morning, you feed the fire. You wait. Someone will dig you out from above eventually. Not everyone in this town is Prudence Ashworth." Eleanor Price looked at her. Then Eleanor Price said, very quietly, "I was one of them. I know. I taught them the song. I know. Mrs. Ashworth. Later, Miss Price. Later." Cordelia lifted the shovel. She went down the ladder. Barnaby went with her. She dug east under the Mead's house first, because the Mead cellar was closest. She broke through into a coal storage pit. Josephine's mother was inside with 2 younger boys. All 3 had been rationing crackers for 2 days. They came through the wall like people being pulled out of a river. She dug north to the Whitcombs. The old elder was there with his wife. They had run out of wood. They had been burning a chair. When Cordelia broke through, the elder tried to speak. He got as far as her name. Then he sat down on his own cellar floor and wept, and she did not have time to comfort him, so she said, "Later, elder, later," and kept digging. She dug west to the Reeds. Jackson Reed opened the wall from his side. He had heard her coming. He said, "Mrs. Ashworth." She said, "Reed." He said, "There is dry pine in my mill. If we live through this, I will send you a wagon load." She said, "Send it to the schoolhouse, not to me." He said, "Yes." She dug to the Miller sisters, to the parsonage, to the Halverstons, where Mrs. Halverston opened the wall herself with a fireplace poker before Cordelia could finish breaking through, and the baby was still alive. Her hands were no longer hands. They were bandaged clubs at the ends of her arms. Eleanor Price had wrapped them 3 times over. Cordelia had unwrapped them once to look. Then she had re-wrapped them without looking again. Her knees had swollen to the size of loaves of bread. On the 3rd day of the storm, she could no longer stand up in the passage. She crawled. She crawled to the last houses. She crawled with the shovel dragging behind her. She crawled with Barnaby crawling beside her, because he had refused, again and again, to stay above. By the 3rd night, 36 people were under her cabin. 6 households, 9 of the missing children, their mothers, 2 fathers who had made it home before the storm hit. Silas Bramwell, who had crawled through the wall of his own storeroom with a can of kerosene in each hand, and had said only, "I brought light." 36 people. In a cabin meant for one woman and one dog. They slept sitting up. They slept along the walls of the passage. They ate her beans. They ate her hams. They drank the sweet water from the sealed spring, which Cordelia had opened on the second night, saying only, "There is water. Bring cups." No one thanked her. She noticed that. She did not mind. Or she told herself she did not mind, which was almost the same thing. On the morning of the fourth day, Barnaby stopped eating again. He was lying beside the trapdoor. His head was up. His ears were forward. He was staring at the ceiling. Cordelia knew that look. She had seen it before, 18 days before, in her own kitchen, when it had been the only warning she had. She crawled to him. "What?" He did not turn. "What, old man?" Then she heard it. Above. Faint. Slow. The long, dry groan of old wood beginning to fail. Somewhere in Marchmont Ridge, a roof was about to come down. She got Eleanor Price. Eleanor came at once. Eleanor had not slept in 3 days either. Her hair was pinned back with a strip of muslin. Her hands were bloody. She looked 10 years older than she had on the first day. "Where?" "Listen." The groan came again. "That is a house, Cordelia." "I know." They looked at the map. They looked at the small square at the top of the road. Prudence Ashworth's house. 30 years old. Built of green pine, poorly seasoned, by a crew of men, who had cut corners, because Prudence had haggled over the price. Elias had told her the story 100 times. 30 years of Colorado winters. 30 years of frost and heave. And now 40 inches of snow on the roof. Cordelia sat back on her heels. She is alone up there. Yes. She is 65 years old. Yes. Eleanor Price looked at her. Eleanor Price said very carefully, "She tried to put you out in the snow, Cordelia, 2 weeks ago, in front of witnesses, with the deed in her hand. I know. You do not owe her. I know that too." Cordelia picked up the shovel. She began to crawl toward the north branch of the passage. Eleanor Price caught her elbow. "Then why?" Cordelia stopped. She turned her head. Slow. Deliberate. She looked at Eleanor Price full in the face. "Because if I let her die down here to punish her, I become the woman she said I was." Eleanor Price did not let go of her elbow for one long second. Then she did. Cordelia crawled on. Barnaby crawled beside her. She dug for perhaps a quarter of an hour. Then the wall thinned. Then it gave way. And above her, close, the long groan of failing wood turned, all at once, into the sharp crack of a beam splitting. Cordelia scrambled through. She found herself in a low crawl space. Dirt floor. Old joists overhead. Cobwebs. A single square of gray daylight, where a broken cellar window was letting in the storm. Snow was already on the floor. She stood up. The crawl space was tall enough for her to stand hunched. She lifted the lantern. Prudence Ashworth's cellar stairs were in the corner. They were bowed in the middle, sagging. Cordelia climbed. She got as far as the top step. The cellar door was jammed. She put her shoulder against it. Nothing. She put her whole weight against it. 265 pounds of Cordelia Ashworth hit that door. It gave. She fell into the kitchen. The kitchen was destroyed. The far wall was pushed inward. The main beam had split at the center and was hanging down at a slant, pinning the kitchen table to the floor. Snow was pouring through a hole in the roof the size of a coffin. The stove was cold, cold as a stone. On the floor beside the fallen beam, pinned but not crushed, lay Prudence Ashworth. She was on her side. Her right leg was twisted under her at a wrong angle. Her face was gray. Her lips were blue. She was awake. She turned her head. She saw Cordelia. Her mouth moved. No sound came out. Then, on the second try, "You!" Cordelia crossed the kitchen. She dropped to her knees beside her mother-in-law. "Yes." "You came." "Yes." "Why?" Cordelia did not answer. She looked at the beam, Prudence's leg, at the hole in the roof. She looked back at Prudence. "Can you move your arms?" "Yes." "Then hold on to me." She got Prudence into a sitting position. Prudence made a sound she had probably not made since the day her son was born. A sound of pain so complete it had no shame left in it. Cordelia said, I know. Hold on." She dragged the old woman across the kitchen floor. In. Prudence's twisted leg trailed. Prudence's face was against Cordelia's shoulder. Cordelia could feel the old woman's breath, cold and shallow, against her neck. They reached the cellar stairs. Cordelia looked down them. They were bowed. The rail was gone. There was no way to carry a woman with a broken leg down those stairs standing up. So Cordelia sat on the top step. She put her arm under Prudence's arms, and she began to slide, one step at a time, down the stairs on her own broad back, with her mother-in-law held tight against her chest. 6 steps. 7. 8. On the 9th step, the beam upstairs gave with a crack like a rifle shot, and the ceiling above the cellar stairs came down in a rush of snow and splintered pine. Cordelia landed on the cellar floor, with Prudence on top of her. She lay there for 1 second. 2. She could not tell at first whether she was hurt. Then she moved her hands. Then her feet. Nothing was broken. She pushed herself up. Prudence was still breathing. Cordelia dragged her toward the crawl space opening. She got her through. She got her into the passage. Barnaby was waiting on the other side. He looked at Prudence Ashworth. He did not growl. Cordelia laid her mother-in-law flat on the passage floor. She sat back against the wall. All right. Then she began to crawl back toward the cabin, dragging a 65-year-old woman, with a broken leg, through a tunnel her son had begun, and her daughter-in-law had finished. She made it to the schoolhouse chamber before her strength gave out. Eleanor Price was there with a lantern. Eleanor said nothing. She lifted Prudence's shoulders. Cordelia lifted her hips. Between them, they carried the old woman the rest of the way. The storm broke on the morning of the 6th day. Cordelia knew it before she opened her eyes. She had been asleep on the passage floor beside Barnaby. The dog's breathing was slow and easy. The passage was warm from 36 bodies, and the pressure in the sky above them was gone. She opened her eyes. She sat up. She crawled the ladder. The trapdoor was heavy. She pushed it. It moved an inch. Silas Bramwell, from below, put his shoulder up beside hers. Then Jackson Reed. Then Elder Whitcomb. Together they pushed the trapdoor open. Snow fell into the cabin in a soft, silent wave. The 4 of them stood in Cordelia's kitchen and looked at the world. Sunlight, for the first time in 6 days. Marchmont Ridge was almost gone. Only the roof lines and the chimneys broke through the drifts. The church steeple leaned east. The schoolhouse was buried to the 2nd-story windows. Where Prudence Ashworth's house had stood, there was a low, ragged mound with pine beams sticking out of it like the ribs of a whale. No one spoke. Then Silas Bramwell, quietly, without looking at anyone. 36. Cordelia said, 36. Elder Whitcomb put his hand over his eyes. They began that morning to dig upward, to dig outward, to clear paths from house to house. Jackson Reed sent for his dry pine, and it was hauled by hand across the drifts to every household. The Meads opened their kitchen to the Halverstons, because the Halverstons' roof had failed on the 4th day, and no one had known. Silas Bramwell opened his store, and gave away flour by the pound to anyone who asked. He did not write a single name in his ledger. Prudence Ashworth stayed in Cordelia's cabin. She had nowhere else to go. Cordelia set her leg herself, with Eleanor Price holding the lamp, and Josephine Mead's mother holding Prudence's hand. Prudence did not cry out. Prudence did not thank her. Prudence looked at the ceiling of Cordelia's cabin, and said nothing at all. 3 weeks passed. The snow began to compact. The paths widened. The mine reopened. The children went back to school in the parsonage parlor, because the schoolhouse roof had cracked in 3 places. On the 22nd night, after the storm, Prudence Ashworth, sitting up in Cordelia's bed for the first time, said, "There was a letter." Cordelia was at the stove, stirring soup. She did not turn. What letter? From the doctor. In Denver. In the spring of '84. Cordelia stopped stirring. Go on. He wrote to me. He said there had been reports of fevers coming up through Kansas. On the trains. Yes. He said quarantine was the only cure. Yes. He said to send for him if anyone in the town showed the sign. Cordelia set the spoon down. She turned. She looked at her mother-in-law. Prudence's face was gray. Not from pain. From something else. You did not send for him.
No.
You did not tell anyone about the letter.
No.
You burned it. Yes. Why? Prudence's mouth worked. For a long moment nothing came out. Then, because I believed. That faith was enough. Cordelia stood very still by the stove. She thought about Marion, who had been 8 years old. She thought about Wren, who had been 5, and who had made a sound in his last hour that she had never described to a living soul. She thought about Elias, who had said tell her under the, and had died before he could finish. She thought about a chokecherry tree planted over 3 graves. She thought about all of these things at once. And then she thought about the fact that Prudence Ashworth had, at last, said the true sentence. The one she had been carrying in silence for 3 years and 8 months. Cordelia crossed the room. She sat down in the chair beside the bed. Her knees, for the first time in weeks, did not complain. Sunday, this coming Sunday, you will stand up in your congregation. On crutches, and you will say it, every word of it, in front of every person you have ever preached obedience to. Prudence's eyes filled. Please. That is not a request, Mother Ashworth. Cordelia, that is not the price of my forgiveness. I am not offering forgiveness. That is the price of my care. You will stand up on Sunday and speak the truth to the people who have followed you. Or you will find another cabin to convalesce in. There are none. The old woman looked at her. She looked at her for a long time. Then Prudence Ashworth said, quietly, yes. Cordelia stood up. She went back to the stove. She stirred the soup. That Sunday, Prudence Ashworth stood in the front of the parsonage parlor. She stood on crutches. Her right leg was in splints. Her face was pale, but her voice, when it came, did not shake. She said what she had said in Cordelia's cabin. Every word of it. She did not weep. She did not ask forgiveness. She simply said the true thing in front of the people she had lied to for 4 years, and then she sat down in the front pew and did not move. No one clapped. No one cried out. There was only a silence, so long and so heavy that Silas Bramwell said afterward it had felt like a hand pressed against his chest. Cordelia Ashworth was not there. She was under her cabin in the eastern passage, replacing a bent ventilation pipe with a straight one, because a passage that had held 36 lives once might have to hold them again someday. Prudence Ashworth lived 2 more winters. She lived them in Cordelia's cabin, because the frame house at the top of the road was a ruin. Cordelia fed her. Cordelia bathed her. When she could no longer bathe herself, Cordelia sat with her, evening after evening, in silence, while the fire burned down. They did not speak much. They did not need to. On the night Prudence died, in the spring of 1890, she took Cordelia's hand. Her grip was almost nothing. She said, "Can you?" Cordelia knew what she was asking. "I do not forgive you. But I have put it down. That is what I have. That is what I can give you." Prudence closed her eyes. She said so quietly that Cordelia almost missed it, "Thank you." She was gone before the fire went out. Cordelia buried her beside Elias. She was the only person present at the grave. She dug it herself. Old Barnaby died in the winter of 1891. He was 12 years old. He had spent his last year sleeping by the trapdoor. Cordelia buried him 3 feet from the cabin door, and she planted a wild apple sapling above him, because she wanted something on that grave that would flower. The apple tree took. The passage stayed open. The town council had asked Cordelia after the storm, to keep it. She had agreed on one condition, that it be stocked. Always. That there always be lamp oil and dry beans and blankets and a barrel of the sweet water and matches sealed in jars. That the children of Marchmont Ridge learn its bends the way they learned their letters. That no one, ever again, be trapped above ground, because the ground below had been forgotten. They agreed. Silas Bramwell brought the flour himself, every autumn, until he died in 1903. Jackson Reed rebuilt the schoolhouse in the spring of '88, and he braced its cellar with a hidden door that opened directly into the passage. Eleanor Price taught in that schoolhouse for 19 more years. She never mentioned the song again. Neither did any of her students. It had, somehow, in the winter of 1887, simply stopped being sung. Cordelia Ashworth opened her cabin to other women. A widow from Silver Fork, whose in-laws had turned her out. A young mother, from a mining camp east of Leadville, whose community had blamed her, when her baby did not survive. A woman from a town that no longer existed, who had walked 40 miles in the wrong shoes. Cordelia took them in. She fed them. She gave them a corner. She asked no questions they were not ready to answer. She called the cabin, on the small hand-painted sign she nailed above the door in the summer of 1889, Elias House. By the time she died, in the spring of 1911, at the age of 66, 29 women had come through Elias House. She was buried on the ridge, beside Elias, beside Marion, beside Wren, beside Prudence, beside Barnaby. The chokecherry had grown tall. The apple tree flowered every May. 60 years after the storm, in the spring of 1947, a woman named Josephine Mead Halverston, who was 66 years old, and had been 6 on the morning she climbed, through a hole in a cellar wall holding an old dog's collar, was invited to speak at a small ceremony on the ridge outside Marchmont. The ceremony was for the unveiling of a small bronze plaque, set into a piece of native stone, at the mouth of what had come to be called the Ashworth Passage. The plaque had been paid for by the granddaughter of Eleanor Price. She was 31 years old. She held a doctorate in geology from the University of Colorado. She had spent the last 4 years mapping the natural karst systems of the Front Range, and she had, in the course of that work, come to understand that a woman with no formal education, working alone with a shovel in the winter of 1887, had correctly identified one of the most significant karst formations in the state. Her paper on the subject, published the year before, opened with a sentence that had been quoted in more than one classroom since. The woman my town called the Fat Widow read the ground beneath her feet more accurately than any engineer of her generation. Josephine Mead Halverston stood at the plaque. The plaque was small. It was not showy. Cordelia Ashworth would not have wanted showy. It read, Cordelia Ashworth, 1845 to 1911. She dug because she loved. A small crowd had gathered, perhaps 30 people, most of them descendants. Most of them had never met the woman whose name was on the stone. At the front of the crowd, a girl of about 7 was holding her mother's hand. The girl was looking at the plaque. She sounded it out quietly to herself. Then she looked up at her mother. Who was she? Her mother knelt. She was the woman who saved your great-grandmother, when your great-grandmother was your age. The girl looked at the plaque again. Why did they call her the Fat Widow? Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice that Cordelia Ashworth herself might have used on a porch in a doorway, on a road in front of the general store, because they were not brave enough to call her by her name, and she was brave enough to save them anyway. The girl thought about that. She reached up. She touched the plaque. I would like to have known her. Her mother stood. She looked at the ridge, at the cabin still standing, still cared for, still with a wild apple tree at the door. At the chokecherry above 3 small graves on the eastern slope. At the low sunlight coming down, through the pines. You do know her, sweetheart. Every time you decide to be kinder than the people around you, you are knowing her then. The girl considered this.